What's up, guys? Welcome back to my blue set review for the Final Fantasy MTG set that is released on June 13th, 2025. I've already made the set review for the white colors, and I'll be going through all of the white, blue, black, red, and green colors in that order, and we are going to talk about some very interesting blue cards today. As always, my name is Nathan, and you're watching the Solid Productions YouTube channel. If you enjoy this video, leave a like on it. Always appreciate it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked below. With that out of the way, we can hop into our first card here, starting us off with Jador Aristocratic Capital. This is a sorcery for 6 mana. Target opponent mills half their library rounded down, and it is a tapped land on the back side. Not much commentary for this card, actually, just because I think this is just simply an auto-include into any mill deck with blue. Clearly, any mill deck would want an MDFC land that mills their opponent's libraries, especially if you have like a Brewvac or something on the battlefield that can double that up. The going rate for target opponent to mill half the library is about 5 mana here, with Traumatized being the obvious comparison. Maddening Cacophony even better, because for 6 mana we can have each opponent mill half their library rounded up. So both of these are really just combo pieces with Brewvac, and I think that Jador is going to be yet another option here, but also will sit in your land slot. So I think just an instant include for any mill deck with blue. Then we move on here to our second card, which is Louisoix Sacrifice. 1-mana instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a legendary creature or pay 2 mana. Counter target activated ability, triggered ability, or non-creature spell. So this is basically a more modal version of Disallow. Some decks do run Tail's End as well, which is a pretty decent card, although I don't personally run it in a lot of decks. I think that Louisoix Sacrifice is better the higher bracket you go. If you're in a CADH deck and you have your commander sitting on the battlefield, just not really doing much, then yes, you will sacrifice the legendary creature in order to prevent that game-winning spell from going off. However, if you're in a casual commander game, bracket 2, maybe low bracket 3 or mid bracket 3, I think that Louisoix Sacrifice is a bit of a trap, because there's often not a legendary creature on board that you want to sacrifice. Now, you could argue that you could turn off a board wipe by sacrificing that legendary creature, assuming that we don't want to pay the 2, but at the same time, we could just be running like a Swan Song or an Offer You Can't Refuse, which I still think are better than Louisoix Sacrifice. So I think this is an interesting addition to the repertoire of potential 1-mana counter target non-creature spell. Of course, it can also target the activated ability, triggered ability portion, but that's not typically as relevant. I mean, yes, there are powerful activated and triggered abilities that are running around in Commander, but would you want to spend a full card to counter an activated ability or triggered ability? That remains to be seen. So I think this is an interesting card, but not one I would put into very many casual Commander decks. And so as far as commanders that this might want to be running, you might want to look at really low-cost commanders, such as I run like a Rograk Thracios Polymorph deck, where Rograk is simply just a 0-mana body to be sacrificed for a polymorph spell or something like that. And here, Rograk, again, could just be sacrificed to the Louisoix Sacrifice, but again, you really only have one opportunity to play a 0-cost creature before you start adding the commander tags, so you just have to be really careful about that. I'm not as high on Louisoix Sacrifice in casual Commander. I think you should really avoid this, and that this is pretty much a trap card. And that will take us to our next card here, which is Stolen Uniform. The gist of this card is for 1 mana, we basically get to steal an equipment and then attach it to our creature, and if it is not our equipment, that equipment goes back to its owner and unequips, and if it is our equipment, then it stays on the creature. So I think that this is more designed for Standard. In Commander, we already have some powerhouse enchantment equipping at instant speed type of effects. Sigarda's Aid is one of the most popular, found in a lot of Voltron decks. Inventory Management does a similar impression here, but it does not have the steal target equipment clause. So I think this is more a tech piece, or more of a sort of sideboard piece for Commander, or if there's like a specific equipment-based deck in Standard, you might be interested in this. But in Commander, I guess I'm not sure if you would really want this. You'd have to be in an equipment-heavy meta, but I did want to mention this in this set review because it is the first time where we've really seen like a steal target equipment and attach it to our commander. So kind of a cool effect there. So as far as commanders that might want this though, Tetsuo Imperial Champion is an equipment commander. Really, I'm looking at commanders that don't have white in their color identity, specifically because a lot of white spells already have sort of auto-equip spells in them. So I'd be looking more towards any commander with blue in it that doesn't have white. And so I arrived at Tetsuo and Dalekos. Tetsuo, of course, being an equipment-based commander as well, and it will deal damage equal to the highest amount of value among equipment attached to it to any target. And then Dalekos as well is just a simple mana dork for your artifact spells or abilities of artifacts. decks, and it cares about equipped creatures as well. So give the Stolen Uniform a look if you have a, Grixis or any sort of blue equipment deck, but otherwise I'd probably steer clear of this if you're in white. Next up here we have Owaka Traveling Merchant, 2 mana 1/2 legendary creature, human citizen. Tap, remove a counter from an online permanent you control, draw a card. And that is so important that it says an online permanent because we can remove counters from sagas. We already have Sage of Fables and Tekkathal Inquiry Dominus that can also remove counters from things, but I think that this is such a simple, elegant design that's going to be one of the best vegetable pieces in any saga deck, because we simply get to reward ourselves with card advantage while also abusing our saga chapter abilities at the same time. And for only 2 mana, I think Owaka is incredibly efficient, and I really do think that this is a super staple for any sort of saga deck. And so therefore we might look at this in some sort of a Terra Magical Adept saga creature deck. And of course Tom Bombadil has been a very popular saga commander for a while, but I think that Owaka has to be an auto include because just an easy source of card advantage, and it doesn't have 5 lines of text that you need to read. Simply tap, remove a counter, and draw a card. I really love that design. Next up here we have Cargo Ship, which is a 2 mana 2/3 mana dork. It's not actually a mana dork because you can tap it immediately because it is an artifact, so it's really more of a mana rock, but that mana can only be spent to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifact sources. So we might want to run this in any sort of vehicle deck. I made a Stand Paranoid Partisan deck tech. If you're interested, check that out. And this card was basically built for Shorakai Genesis Engine decks because it can be used to activate that cost in Shorakai's draw 2, discard 1 ability there. Now, the Cargo Ship itself is a vehicle which is really nice. I like how it does synergize there, and I think that any vehicle deck is going to want more ramp pieces in them because vehicles tend to be relatively expensive and require you to obviously crew them, so you're going to need mana to both cast your vehicles and then also cast whatever you need to actually crew those vehicles. Vehicles are just a very needy archetype, we shall say. So Cargo Ship, definitely an interesting little addition to vehicle decks with blue. Next up here we have one of the most interesting cards from the set. This is Go-Go Master of Mimicry. For 3 mana we get a 2/4 wizard, XX, tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability you control X times. You may choose new targets for the copies. This ability can't be copied and X can't be 0. So we've seen this only once before in the blue color with Adric Mathematical Genius, which is significantly less efficient. And also there are some additional effects in colors like Lithoform Engine, and I believe there's also like Strionic Resonator, which does a similar impression here too. But Go-Go is really interesting, and it really sort of gets the gears turning here for how we can abuse that ability. The primary problem I see at first glance with Go-Go is that it does cost XX, which means that it's going to be a very mana intensive ability. So that means that we probably aren't going to be casting a creature for its ETB and then copying that ETB because it's just going to be too much mana to do that. Instead, I think we will actually look towards effects that we can get at phase changes. So like at the beginning of your upkeep or at the beginning of your end step, things that will happen that we've already cast from a previous turn. And then also we might want to look at effects that will really multiply our mana so that we can continue to tap Go-Go and pay for bigger and bigger X's within that ability. So as I was looking for really good effects that meet this criteria, I came up with something like the Prismatic Bridge, which is an excellent trigger you will want to be running if you're in a Prismatic Bridge deck. Anything that is in your deck is going to be just a giant bomb that you're going to slam right on the battlefield there. Also, Urza Chief Artificer has an end step trigger that you want to multiply as many times as possible because those colorless constructs will get bigger the more artifacts that you have. So I think that those would be really good options for Go-Go. But if we were to look more at the mana side of things, something like a Zolotoyak or Wilderness Reclamation, what will happen is at the beginning of your end step, you will have the trigger go on the stack to untap all lands you control. Now, assuming that you have mana ability to activate the Go-Go, you will then, in response to that trigger, activate the Go-Go to then copy those triggers. And now you are able to have a bunch of triggers to untap all your lands, which means that you have a bunch of mana at your disposal to cast things at instant speed, and they have to be at instant speed. So Zolotoyak, really interesting. I think Go-Go will probably go into most Zolotoyak decks because that's generally what they're built to do, is just abuse that giant untap trigger there in the bottom clause of the card. But I think that Go-Go in general will probably be used to do pretty unfair things, but you really have to build around it. It's definitely a heavy build around, so I think we'll see that in very few decks, but in the decks that it will go into, it will be doing a lot of work. All right, and that will take us to our next card here, Matoya Archon Elder, which is a powerhouse in Scry and Surveil decks. My goodness, for 3 mana, we get a 1/4. Whenever you Scry or Surveil, draw a card. So that means all of your Surveil lands, all of your little cantrippy Surveil 1, draw a card, or opt Scry 1, draw a card, is going to double up on card advantage there. Matoya is going to be a very good card draw engine in all of these decks, because these decks typically want to be scrying or surveilling multiple times a turn. So Matoya, if it sticks around on the battlefield, will be drawing you at least 3 to 5 cards a turn. Absolutely insane value once this is really built around in a scry or surveil heavy deck. So in certain decks that will be doing a lot of that, such as Elminster or the new Ultimacia Time Sorceress, whenever it enters or attacks, surveil 2. Now imagine just surveilling 2 and then drawing a card there on every attack that you make with Ultimacia. Absolutely crazy value. And again, this won't go into many decks, but the decks that it will go into, it will be an absolute powerhouse. All right, and then we'll move on to Realms Sketching. 4 mana sorcery, create a token that's a copy of target artifact, creature, or land. Now, there's not a lot of effects in blue that allow us to copy lands. There's a recent spell printed called a copy land, I believe, where you can copy a land for 3 mana. And also the going rate for effects like this is about 3 mana to copy a target artifact or creature. Replication technique is one of the few options in blue that you have that can copy lands. And so what you can do with this is really just copy the busted lands that you play, because they're basically uninteractable. So I have a full Field of the Dead list helmed by Baral, Chief of Compliance, that I made a deck tech for. You can check that out if you're interested. But usually that deck is able to make 3-4 copies of Field of the Dead, and that's even just with Field of the Dead, not let alone if we're not even considering something like a Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, or Cabal Coffers, or something insane like that, that Realm Sketching can copy. So for 4 mana, it seems a little bit overcosted, but I think if you're copying something absolutely busted in your mana base, then that's where you'll be playing this. I think if you're looking to copy creatures, there's already better spells, more efficient spells that do that. Phantasmal Image is only like 2 mana. I believe there's also Flesh Duplicate now, which is only 2 mana. So those tend to be cheap to copy creatures, but it's really more rare to find land copiers, and it's nice to see Realm Sketching being added to that list of options. Then we move on to our next card, which is the Water Crystal. For 4 mana, we get a legendary artifact. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill that many cards plus 4 instead. And we can pay 6, tap it. Each opponent mills cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, which is, of course, that many plus 4 with the Water Crystal's passive. So I think that this is simply a card you play in mill decks. I mean, if you are in a Brewvac or any of the other popular mill commanders, then you just run this card. There's no reason not to. It is basically a combo piece that will win you the game, on top of making your blue spells a little bit cheaper. Now, as far as running it in a ramp slot, I would not really run it in a ramp slot, because you really want to be ramping on turn 2. We've shown in the white video the math behind the crystals, which I'll have up on screen as well. There's a difference of about 3 mana produced over the course of the game if we assume that the game ends on turn 9. So the Water Crystal will produce you mana, but just not as much as that cheaper Sapphire Medallion. So I think that this is more of a combo piece than a ramp piece, but the fact that it does both is pretty excellent for only 4 mana. So I don't know, not much more commentary here. If you're in a mill deck, you play it. I think that's as simple as it gets. Then we move on to our next card, which is Summon Valifor, 5 mana 5/4 Saga Drake with flying. Its first chapter, each opponent chooses a creature with the greatest mana value among creatures they control. Return those creatures to their owner's hands. And we don't really care about chapters 2 through 4, because we're going to be abusing the heck out of that first chapter. The comparisons here that I have are Enigma Thief, which return up to 1 target non-land permanent for each opponent to those players' hands. And then Soul Shatter is a very, very popular black spell that forces the sacrifice, so they are dealt with permanently. But I think that Summon Valifor is going to be an instant slam into your Saga creature decks, because you can really keep manipulating those counters, removing that counter, constantly locking your opponents down with that constant bounce for chapter 1. So something like a Xavier Sal, tap, remove a counter from another permanent you control to populate, activate only as a sorcery, or you can proliferate depending on what you need. This is a creature itself if you want to activate activate that sacrifice ability on Xavier Sal. And of course, we have Tom Bombadil here as another stand-in for all of the Saga commanders out there. I think that Summon Valifor, if you're able to consistently remove counters, synergy with Owaka, by the way, then you'll probably simply run this to constantly lock down your opponents, and it's going to be really annoying to play against, but my gosh, is this an excellent card in a Saga deck. Next up here, we have Summon Shiva. Tap target creature an opponent controls, put a stun counter on it, and then at Chapter 3, draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control. This is the second time we have seen the text draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control. Here with Hilda's Crown of Winter being the first, we have a lot of effects that will draw us a card for each tapped creature one opponent controls, but you get a lot more cards if you're able to draw a card for each tapped creature all of your opponents control. So I think that this, while you have to wait for it for a little bit, if you're in a Saga creature deck, you're probably speed running through those chapters or, removing counters from them. This is one where you want to get to that Chapter 3 as soon as possible. Now it is 5 mana, so even if you assume that with synergy, it's a 5 mana draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control, that's still an okay rate. But if you're in a Saga deck and you want to be speed running through your Sagas, then you'll probably want to play this card as a source of card advantage. So once again, we look at our Saga creature commanders like Terra, like Tom Bombadil, etc. Then we move on to Edgar, King of Figaro, 6 mana 4/5. When it enters, draw a card for each artifact you control, and the first time you flip one or more coins this turn, who cares? We care about this because it says when it enters, draw a card for each artifact you control, which is about the going rate for draw a card for each X of something you control. Paul Jamar for humans is a comparable card here, also a 4/5, but it does have flying for 6 mana. And then there's also in black the Monumental Corruption, which will draw you X cards and lose X life, or X is the number of artifacts you control for only 5 mana. But with Edgar, you get a body that's able to be flickered, so I think that's pretty much on rate. So with Edgar, I think you really just want to run it in an artifact heavy deck, possibly as a top end draw spell. Hopefully you care about the human and creature type or something like that. I think 6 mana to draw, potentially 6 mana to draw, 10 to 15 cards is definitely playable for 6 mana. I just think that it's a little bit clunky taking up a 6 CMC slot here. Typically with like big artifact generation effects, your top end finishers are typically overruns, like the new Clue finisher that I don't know the name of, but I'll have that up on screen as well. That's run in a lot of Lonus decks. But I think that, if you want to run a card advantage spell in the top end and draw, 10, 15 cards, hopefully, then give Edgar a look. And then we move on to Summon Leviathan, 6 mana 6/6, Saga Leviathan with Ward 2. Return each creature that is the Kraken, Leviathan, Merfolk, Octopus, or Serpent to its owner's hand. And then it gives you a little bit of a card advantage there, actually a decent amount of card advantage, because it says until end of turn, whenever a Kraken, Leviathan, Merfolk, Octopus, or Serpent attacks, draw a card, and that can stack up a bunch. So you get a board wipe plus card advantage stapled onto one card. I think that's going to be absolutely excellent, and there are a couple of Simic, just sort of sea creature commanders that would really, really want this. Kiora, Sovereign of the Deep, Kinesos, Priest of Thassa as well, and I think you probably, of these two, I think Kinesos might be a little bit better because it does allow you to cheat mana with that activated ability, but Summon Leviathan, if you can somehow manipulate the counters, even better. But I think that honestly, you're probably happy just in a sea creature tribal deck to just run through the chapters as normal and just treat this as sort of a 6 mana bounce one-sided board wipe. And then we'll move on to Ishtola Rule, which is one of the most interesting cards from the set, and I think this is one we'll spend a decent amount of time talking about. 6 mana 3/5 Cat Druid. At the beginning of your end step, exile target creature controller and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Then if it's the first end step of the turn, there's an additional end step after this step. So the comparison that we've been seeing online is that everybody's comparing this to Thassa Deep Dwelling, and WotC we've been seeing has been really experimenting with more designs that play around with multiple phase steps. So for example, Obika makes a bunch of upkeep steps that you can basically just copy a bunch of your upkeep triggers, is sort of how that works. So Ishtola, the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to play this for the flicker effect? Because ultimately we will get 2 flickers, but then we also get an additional end step. So we have to think about, okay, well, are there also really good end step triggers that we could use here? So we might want to look at, again, those Wilderness Reclamation or Zolotoyak end step triggers where we're going to be making a ton of mana, and we can do that twice. I think that's a decent option for this, but we can also look at giant end step triggers that will deal damage. For example, Wound Reflection, we actually get to burn our opponents for the amount of life that they lost this turn. Very cool to do that twice. Or Brainstealer Dragon, at the beginning of your end step, exile the top card of each opponent's library. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. If you cast a spell this way, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. And even if Brainstealer Dragon goes away, you can still actually cast those cards. And we talked about end step triggers from Urza as well. Urza would be another end step trigger that you might want to double up, although for 6 mana, I don't know if I would really want to do this because it seems a little bit clunky in an Urza deck that already wants to run a bunch of cheap creatures. But just like another example, Chimil the Inner Sun will give you mana and card advantage by discovering 5 twice, which seems pretty good. Ultimately, though, I think what you'll want to run this in is any deck that is running Conjurer's Closet. I think this best goes into a Flicker deck. With Conjurer's Closet on the battlefield, on combination with Y'shtola, we can have a total of 4 end step creature flickers. So imagine that we have just a big giant bomb like Atraxa Unifier, one of the best ETBs in the game, on the battlefield. We get to flicker her 4 times with Y'shtola. That seems pretty busted, but that also assumes that we already have 7 mana plus a 6 mana permanent, so a total of like 13 mana out on the battlefield. I mean, that is a little bit of Magical Christmas Land, but I think that Y'shtola is really interesting. One that will, really see a lot of brews around. I don't know if she would make a great commander because you're only in mono blue. There are some Thassa decks that are more control based, that might run more control type of spells, but the fact that she is 6 mana, I think, is probably what is holding Y'shtola back from seeing a lot of play, because a 6 mana commander in 2025 is very, very expensive, and it doesn't really draw you cards or ramp you in any way. And so, not that it's like unplayable, but most commanders in 2025 will do one of those 2 things in order to ensure that you accelerate yourself into the late game. So Y'shtola is one of the most interesting cards, and I'd be excited to see how this card gets brewed around. And then we move on to Ultimacy, a temporal threat, 6 mana 4/4. When it enters, tap all creatures your opponents control. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So this is just going to be one of the most miserable cards to see in Flicker decks. You flicker this thing, it will draw you more Flicker spells. You flicker it, you draw more Flicker spells because the way has been cleared for your creatures to get in. And so this will be just a great card in like Brago or something like that. It's going to be pretty miserable, but it is 6 mana, so we do have to, it is pretty balanced because it is very clunky there at the 6 mana slot. So that will take us to our honorable mentions, and we just have a couple of cards to talk about today. First up, we have Travel the Overworld, 7 mana sorcery, but it does have affinity for towns, draw 4 cards. This templating is very similar to Into the Story. If we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, we can draw 4 for only 4 mana. I suspect that Travel the Overworld will be very similar in towns decks. Obviously, this will be going that you'll just be an auto include. Then we move to Valkyrie Aerial Unit, 7 mana 5/4 construct, affinity for artifacts, flying when this creature enters surveil 2, and it itself is an artifact, which is absolutely huge. So if you're in any sort of artifact self-mill deck or artifact reanimation deck, then give Valkyrie Aerial Unit a look, but I don't think this will see a lot of play because it is just a 5/4 body, but the fact that it has affinity for artifacts and it is an artifact itself just lends to a lot of self-synergy that artifact decks are known for. And that will wrap up our set review and bring us to our top 3 blue cards from the Final Fantasy set. And if we could get a drum roll, please, we have Owaka Traveling Merchant, Go-Go Master of Mimicry, and the Water Crystal. I love Owaka Traveling Merchant. I think that the Saga theme or the Saga archetype is going to be beefed up a lot more once Final Fantasy is out, given we have both now Saga creatures and a lot more counter support and counter shenanigans added to the format with cards like Owaka, and I just love how it simply draws you a card and removes a counter so that you can keep reusing your Saga chapters. I think it's just going to be an instant shoe-in into all Saga decks. Go-Go, I think, has the potential to be busted wide open, but we need to just find the correct activated ability to target with this. It really gets the gears turning, and I really want to see the builds that can happen as a result of Go-Go, especially the fact that he is legendary and can be a commander. I'm sure there's going to be some awesome commander decks brewed around this guy. And then the Water Crystal, we also have to give a shout out here to our other mill card that's going to see a lot of play, Jador, but I did not include that in our top 3 because lands are just sort of boring to include in the top 3 analysis here. But the Water Crystal is going to be basically an incredible combo piece in all mill decks, and I think that mill has definitely been powered up a lot more into more, honestly, more of the combo archetype. I've really tossed around for a while the idea of brewing a mill deck, but I think that it tends to lean into combo because mill actually helps your opponents until you can actually close out the game with a win. So that way you can't really play value-y mill because you'll just get run over with graveyard shenanigans, and especially the fact that most decks can play out of their graveyard in 2025. So I think that instead mill decks tend to lean into more combo, and that's really not as interesting to me. But I think that with the Water Crystal, not only is it potentially a combo piece, but it's going to like really boost up your value-y mill plays. So maybe it will make mill more viable in casual commander. And I believe, what's the 3-mana mill? It's like a 10-1 that I think it's called the Mind Skinner. Definitely will find its way into Mind Skinner decks. So that is the my blue set review for Final Fantasy, which releases on June 13th. If you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. I would also appreciate it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked below. And hopefully we see you all in the black set review.